Russia-Ukraine peace talks. The US negotiators were there in the Kremlin talking to Vladimir Putin and his team for 5 hours, but there was no breakthrough. And later on, both the Americans and Russians have tried to give the impression that they have made progress and they're ready for more rounds of talks. At the same time, steps are being taken in Europe as well to ensure that things move in a positive direction. Let's talk about it. We have Ambassador Mohan Kumar with us. He's a former senior diplomat joining us from Greater Noida over Zoom. Good evening to you, Ambassador Kumar. What do you make of how these talks went? Initially, it was said very clearly that there was no breakthrough, but the Kremlin came out very clearly saying that there has some progress has been made. Some points have been acceptable. Others have not, but they're ready for more talks.
Yes, thank you, Gautam, for having me. No, I think to me it seems it confirms two things. That one, the peace process is really a tough one, and this conflict is intractable. It's not easy because there is a combination of historical factors which have been responsible for the conflict and the present situation where there is a stalemate and it has become a war of attrition. The second thing that has happened is we don't know the basis of these negotiations. Initially, you will recall that there was a 28-point proposal put forward by the US. The Russians said they are happy to negotiate on the basis of that. But Ukraine and EU said this draft is totally unacceptable as a basis of negotiation. So that became a 19-point draft and nobody knows the contents. So I would say, for the benefit of your viewers, that three issues are at stake, three specific issues. One is the territorial aspect of it. How much territory Ukraine has to give up to Russia in addition to the territory occupied by Russia, so that the conflict comes to an end. Second, we have the question of security. Security not just of Russia, but also security of Ukraine, so that Ukraine does not get invaded again by Russia. So that seems to be the logic, whether Ukraine can have 800,000 troops or more. Can Ukraine be a part of NATO or not? Can it be part of EU? Will there be a multinational, shall we say, a military force to oversee the peace agreement, etc.? Last but not least, I think the issue at stake is also the relationship between US and Russia, and that will involve financial, economic aspects of the agreement, which will enable Russia to join the G7, so that G7 will then become G8. So these are the host of issues, Gautam, and I can see why the negotiations are not easy, because you have parties outside of the conflict. You have the US, you have NATO, and NATO foreign ministers have just met. So you have a host of issues which are interlapping. And that is, I think, a problem in these negotiations. And bear in mind that Russia and Ukraine are not talking to each other directly. It is the US which is practicing shuttle diplomacy. And shuttle diplomacy is always complicated. It's very time consuming.
Yes. And the other player which is not part of the process but is definitely influencing it, is Europe. Because of which I guess it was Vladimir Putin who issued out a warning as well to Europe that we don't want war, but if Europe wants it, we're ready for it. What do you make of that?
That, I think, is a tough statement from Putin, unusually tough statement. And that is because Europe has been saying that we cannot negotiate on the basis of a draft which is completely in favor of Russia. So I think Putin also wants to shift the onus of peace onto Europe. Henceforth, hitherto, Russia has been painted by Europe as a party that does not want peace. And this is Putin's way of telling Europe that, listen, I want peace, maybe on my terms, but I want peace. But it is you who are preventing peace from taking place. In other words, what you find is both Europe and Russia, and of course Ukraine, they're all appealing to the US by saying that we are not to blame. Each one is saying, I'm not to blame. It is the other side. And therefore, the United States, which is carrying out these talks in terms of shuttle diplomacy, is being put in an impossible situation. And I think President Trump is gradually coming to realize that this is not an easy conflict to resolve. This is not like the Gaza one, or this is not like the other conflicts that he has claimed he has resolved. I think this is a conflict which is sui generis, it's complex, and as I said, there are historical factors which make a solution very difficult and time consuming.
Yes, he's described it as a mess, Donald Trump has, but at the same time, there is that factor of what's happened in Pokrovsk, the Russians claiming that they have taken that territory in the Donbass, a key logistics hub. The Ukrainians saying we're still fighting for it, especially we're holding in the north of the city. But we had Ushakov, who was the chief foreign aide, even in these talks for Putin, saying that this did have relevance. You know, our military success on the ground did have relevance in the talks as well with the US negotiators.
There's absolutely no question. You're spot on. I mean, the fact of the matter is Russia cannot lose this war and Ukraine cannot win this war. That is the kind of situation we are facing. There is no way Russia can lose this war given the overwhelming superiority they have in terms of manpower and firepower. And there is also no question that they are making incremental progress. Maybe the Russians are not rolling over Ukraine, that is true, and that might have been the initial expectation, but certainly Russia is making progress. And so as long as President Putin feels that he is winning the war, it is also a negotiating strategy that Russia need not give in immediately, because they are winning the war, if only slowly and incrementally. And I think this makes negotiations that much more difficult.
And Europe has also done two things today. One is moving twin proposals to use the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank, which have been lying with Belgium, and the other to cut off or wean itself off the Russian gas supplies by 2027. What sort of a message does that send to Moscow and to the world?
I think it's a tough signaling. It's tough signaling on the part of EU to actually, they've used a very arcane part of their EU charter to use that article and then say that the frozen funds will be used for a reparation loan. This did not enjoy the consensus of all EU member states. Certainly, Hungary and Slovakia have not been in favor of this measure, but they have used an emergency measure which is not specifically meant for situations like this. So some European analysts are actually questioning the legality of this measure. But that gives you an idea how keen the EU was to help Ukraine, because bear in mind, Gautam, that the United States has stopped funding Ukraine and the US no longer funds the Ukraine war. And Ukraine needs that money very urgently. And that is why the Europeans have gone to this trouble to actually say that we will fund the war in Ukraine, even though there is no consensus among all the members of the European Union. On the second issue, you are right as well. I think Europe wants to signal to Russia that we are no longer going to be dependent on energy from Russia. They've taken a lot of time doing this. They now buy very little crude oil from Russia. But the latest one is that they are also making a promise that they will completely wean themselves away from gas, from natural gas from Russia in 2027. So it is pretty significant.
Yes.
There is no doubt now that EU does not want to be in a situation as they were 10 years ago, when they were extremely dependent on energy from Russia.
Yeah, but in the meantime, no punitive American tariffs for EU. India's got them, and we have Vladimir Putin coming to Delhi on Thursday. So how do you feel that this particular visit, which is coming, he's coming to Delhi for the first time, to India for the first time after the conflict began. How would that really be shadowed by this issue of Ukraine, the fact that peace is still to be achieved there and the conflict is still raging?
Gautam, geopolitically, I cannot think of a more important visit to India than by the Russian president. Please bear in mind that the Russian president's visit is happening at a time when India and the United States have not yet agreed to a trade deal. That's the first point I want to make. The second point is we would like to be briefed by the Russian president about the latest moves on the conflict in Ukraine, because India has always conveyed to President Putin through our Prime Minister that this is not an era of war and that we would like to see the conflict in Ukraine end at the earliest. That's the second. The third, we would also get an idea from President Putin as to how he sees the peace process in Ukraine. And that is important for India to understand. Last but not least, I keep hearing that there will be important defense purchases that India will make from Russia. And that is important for India as well, in terms of India diversifying its defense purchases from many partners. So this visit will be happening under the very, very close monitoring of Western countries, which I think will want to know how there is this body language and what exactly is the outcome of the visit of President Putin to India. That is point number one. Point number two, for India itself, this relationship has assumed importance, as I said, because of the problems that we are having with some of our other partners. So all in all, geopolitically, this visit will be watched very, very closely by analysts and by diplomats all over the world.
Certainly. And on that note, let me end it here and leave room to talk about this key visit for tomorrow and day after, the meat of the visit, of course, day after. Thank you for joining us for the moment, Ambassador Mohan Kumar.